thank you, Mr. Kiswani, for this wonderful lecture. I think we have some questions coming in. We have a question from Chinmay Mittal. He says, "Do you think this pandemic is the survival of the fittest?"
No, I think it is the death of the dumbest. Because I genuinely believe, I don't understand why people are not wearing masks, practicing safe practices, which the government is time and again telling you. Look, it's very simple. The fewer people who get infected, the more easy it is for hospitals to manage them and therefore give you better care. So it is our job as citizens and as individuals just to be extra cautious and try and avoid getting infected. And if all of us think like that, then very few will get infected and the healthcare system won't get burnt out. But it will get over in 2 years. That I can give in writing.
The second question is the reason for the second boundary condition to maintain the supply chain when the time comes to bounce back?
100%. Because let me explain this. You know, for example, if you want to buy a car tomorrow, what is a car? So let's take the car as an ecosystem, which is a very important part of the real economy. A car has normally 100 auto component suppliers because no car manufacturer makes all the components. So they are called OEMs. They are also OEMs. These 100 guys are maybe 500 crore turnover companies. They have 20 suppliers who give them, you know, sub-assembly, who have a turnover of 50 crores. They have 20 guys. So think of it as a decision tree. The car is one, then there are 15 suppliers. Then each of them has a tree, a branch, a bunch of branches, and so on. Let me say, a car cannot be ready if one item is missing, right? So if you compromise the supply chain, somewhere down the line, some guy doesn't pay his smaller vendor on time, that guy goes bust, he doesn't pay his employees, then the car itself will be not ready. So you must pay your vendors, especially the weak and vulnerable, right? So we have large vendors. We have a large IT company that does some IT work for us. We said, listen, 6 months, we're not paying you, sorry. But we have a bunch of small guys in each city. We are in 48 cities. We have small guys who provide us groceries. You know, there are guys who provide us maintenance services. These guys who have 2, 4, 5, 10 crore turnover, we are making sure we are paying them. Because if we don't pay them and they have very little business anyway, and they too have practiced resilience, keep that in mind. If they are alive today, they have shrunk their operations, they are barely breathing. If you don't give them oxygen, they'll die. So it is very much good business sense and so good economics and good heart.
The next question is by Soham Sen. He writes, seeing the books behind you and the clarity with which you speak about your convictions, which are some of the books that have shaped your values, ideas, and understanding of the people and the world, apart from the one that you already mentioned from Robert Kanigel?
So one is Sri Kulkarni's great-grandfather, right? So he is my mentor, my role model. Many people ask me, who's your role model? I have only 2 role models. One is Mahatma Gandhi, because I think he was the first Facebook of the world, by the way, guys. Okay. And because he brought together and aligned the largest number, I think, in history for a cause which is difficult to, you know, to personally empathize with. I mean, why would a migrant labor in India want independence for India? He wants his roti kapda makan, na? But he got them aligned. So that I don't know how many of you know that he is the great grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. So his blood is quite royal, guys, even if he strolls in the campus. And the second is Martin Luther King. I admire these two, also Nelson Mandela. So I'm not, but my personal love, if you look at what I have, is history, mathematics. So that's why I said combinations like Ramanujan, who was a guy who won against all. So if I read the book, I start crying, guys. So I would really urge you to read it. See it from a perspective of a guy who was doomed to die as a migrant farmer and became the second greatest raw mathematical talent of all time. Gauss was the first, by the way, considered the first. And a man who reinvented mathematics. So actually, Anju, I want to tell you, I always wanted to be a teacher. My dad forced me to be an engineer. My mother wanted me to be a doctor, and I hated the sight of blood. So I became an engineer and then MBA. But I wanted to be a teacher. I read books because they are the
lifeblood.
Yeah, they are my oxygen. So I have, by the way, this is one side. I have about 4,000 books in my house. There must be a book within arm's reach, wherever, and I mean wherever, guys, including in the bathroom. So I read basically history. I like some philosophy, math. I also occasionally go through biographies and autobiographies. So I just like reading.
So, Pattu, I was thinking that we should have a series from you, the 10 best books of the year that we can share with the IIM community and learn from that, given your exciting reading habits. Say, share them with us.
Okay, I'll send you an email. I'll have to think about it. This is a very onerous task because it will help shape young minds.
Your mind. I know I get asked the same question as well, but once you've distilled that, it's amazing. It really helps. So please do share.
For strategy, read one thing, guys. Read 2 books. The Arth Shastra by Kautilya or Chanakya and The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
By Sun Tzu.
Okay. And it will be worth reading. I mean, just my general philosophy is that when I read a book, I try and take 1 or 2 or 3 ideas away from it, which I normally scribble in the flyleaf. Okay, so what was the thing that really mattered in that book? What did you absorb? That's not to say I love reading science fiction and all that. So obviously there is no idea that comes from there. But when it's something where there is a message, I like to write it down. And that's something I would recommend to all of you. I don't use Kindle. I think I told Anju I'm a dinosaur in these. But books are, a lifelong companion if you make them so.
Can I make a comment here? Folks, I would like you to appreciate how well Pattu exemplifies the brand that we think represents IIM Calcutta. The discussion that we've had today is one that is intelligent, informed, there's ethics, there's creativity, there's knowledge, there's skills, there's a wide-ranging arena of thought processes. And look at what he just said, the ability to learn. Every time he reads a book, he writes notes in the margin of the 3 things he wants to take away from that book. That is a perfect example of the ability to learn throughout your lives. So thank you, Pattu. I'm sure I'm embarrassing. I had to say that.
The next question is from Pranav Kumar. He says, had entrepreneurship always been on your mind, or did it come to you after you worked for a few years?
It was never on my mind. I had 2 close friends, one from IIM Ahmedabad, that treacherous organization, as I jokingly call it. And
I can hear you, Pattu.
Sorry, Aradhana. Aradhana is my colleague. She's listening.
Hello, everyone.
She's from IIM. You're from IIM Ahmedabad, na, Aradhana?
That's right, Pattu. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. I apologize. I meant the number 2 Management Institute of India, IIM Ahmedabad.
Achha.
And so you see, I believe even IIMs are a part of the modern ecosystem. I call them OLAs, CAB. In the order of priority, you can read it, Calcutta A and B. So I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think I always felt IIM Calcutta, with its emphasis not only on case studies, but more on quant, actually helped me a lot in my professional life, thinking things through quantitatively rather than just qualitatively. Broadly, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. My parents actually had conniptions when I said, and I suspect deep down, although they didn't show it to me, they were very, very disturbed when I became an entrepreneur at the age of 42. Okay, but I didn't have this at the back of my mind. Actually, again, we talk plan A, B, C. So let me tell you an amazing anecdote. When I was 38, 2 friends of mine, both from IIMs, and I went for a boys' weekend to Jaipur. We got trashed, and then we said, what are we doing working? We have a midlife crisis, clearly. So while, I don't know how many of you know, the male menopause is called andropause or climacteric. So we went through the male menopause, which is what are we doing in our lives? Are we making any difference, etc., etc. So we said we'll retire at 40. I was a Tata employee and therefore underpaid. So Tata's overpaid me for values in that sense and underpaid me in cash. And these 2 guys were far better off working for multinationals and so on. So we said we need 5 crores. Suffice to say, after 2 years, I had nothing. They had their 5 crores. So I said, you know something, I need to make 5 crores. So I joined A.T. Kearney, where they promised me 5 crores in 2 years. I worked there for 2 years, but I got bored because it was more, well, there was not enough implementation work and post-merger integration, which is what I wanted to work on. So I said, let me start one hotel, which will be an annuity for me, which will earn money every year and basically take care of my needs, not my lifestyle. That's how I became an entrepreneur, completely by accident, but I was fortunate. A bunch of people from Tata's joined me, took a leap of faith, and somehow we grew into a chain then. I still don't know how, by the way. I pretend to know, but I don't actually.
Okay, so that brings us to another question. I think a similar question that we have. So with multiple hotel chains already having a stronghold in India, what white space made you take the leap and follow your passion?
So look, in India, so again, it is serendipity. I say a lot of my life is serendipity, which means happy chance. When I started Lemon Tree, India had only 5-star hotels. Okay, most of those hotels were owned by high net worth individuals who were really running it for their ego. There was no mid-market. When I was in A.T. Kearney, I had observed that the fastest growing segments in the world are economy and big market hotels. And funnily, in India, there were hardly any. In fact, there were none. So in that sense, we created the category called mid-market. And there was an entire business model that went into it, which I won't bore you with, but I was reasonably sure it would be successful. Good entrepreneurship, folks, is not about the blue sky envisioning you do. I feel, especially if you bootstrap, it is about mitigating risk. So when somebody tells me, you must be loving risk, I say that's utter bullshit. As an entrepreneur, I hate risk. Entrepreneurship, for those of you who consider it, is only about 3 things. It's about what I call PRR. How you take care of your people is first, the most important. Second is risk. Third is reputation. If you focus on these 3 and assuming you have a decent idea and good execution, because people will lead to that, I don't see how you can fail in India. But risk mitigation is critical, and the Indian environment is fraught with risk, whether it's regulatory, whether it is social, whether it is economic, whether it is market risk, whether it is interest rate risk. I mean, there are many. So you should focus on just that. So broadly, in my life, when I looked at the hotel space, I said I can't compete with Taj, Oberoi, ITC, and so on. They're all in the 5-star space. But here's an unoccupied space. So let me design a business model that will work there. And it worked for us. I was lucky. I got great people, including Aradhana, who was our first head of sales. She came from Levers. I got an outstanding project head who had worked with me. I got great operations people. And together, I think we did a fairly good job. We are now the 3rd largest hotel chain in India. We are I think the 2nd largest owners of hotel rooms in India. Of course, the sector has been destroyed, and therefore market caps have crashed by 50%, 60%, and so on. But we did not compete with the established players in their segments. We created our own segment, and it was, to me, it was, there was total logic. Imagine an airline sector in India 20 years ago where the only seats offered were business class. So isn't it a no-brainer to say I'll create an airline with economy seats? So that was the thought process. I'm of course simplifying it, but broadly that.
We are running out of time. I think I just have 2 questions for you. The first question is, what are the kind of challenges that you had while hiring and training the underprivileged at Lemon Tree?
How we started was that I got my first round of institutional funding when Warburg Pincus approached me in 2006. I said, you value the company? And jokingly, I said it's worth 800 crores. Okay, remember the invested capital in Lemon Tree was 20 crores. To my horror, actually, and shock and delight and all these multiple feelings, they said your valuation is right. So here's 300 crores. We'll take 25%. So suddenly, from being a MSME, we could actually shoot for the stars because our model was proven. So at that time, I was very grateful, and I remember speaking to my father and mother, who were big influences in my life, and my father was totally horrified. He said, what is this? He was innately suspicious of business. Okay, and he made me promise that I would do 2 things, which is never pay a bribe, and B is try and give jobs to needy people. So So I called our HR manager, who was a gentleman called Hari, who's retired now. And I said, Hari, go and hire 2 deaf guys. And we had 5 hotels then in this hotel. I had no idea what I was saying. I didn't even know that people who are born deaf become dumb. Dumb means they cannot speak to because they cannot hear. So he hired 2 guys. After a few weeks, one lady came to see me, very well dressed, with a bouquet of flowers. And she came into my office and she started crying. So I said, what happened? I was shocked. She turned out she was the mother of one of those 2 kids. And she said to me that my son is getting married. He's a part of a group of 28 people with disability, speech and hearing impaired. And the only reason he could get married is because he had a job. And he had an entry level unskilled job, which means we were paying him minimum wages. And she said, you know, those other 27 will never get married because nobody will give them a job. And if you don't get married, you see, it's not genetic. You are speech and hearing impaired, you get married, you have normal kids. But nobody marries you because you don't have a job and you don't have prospects of a job. So she said his whole life has changed. So when I heard that, I teared up. And I then called Hari and Aradhana. And I said, we have 2. Well, that was 2006. In 5 years, we must have 100. And in 2011, we got to 100. Then we said in 5 years, we must have 500. So in 2016, we went to 500. And in 2021, we wanted 2,500. I don't know if we'll achieve it. But certainly to me, that's the most satisfying part of my job, which is not only them, but looking at ways to give employment to the untapped and neglected talent pools in our country. People whose lives you can change merely by giving them a job or by skilling them in some form.
And the last question is, and this has come from a number of students, how to attain mental resilience to fight the ups and downs in life.
So let me share something very personal. For 15 years, 16 years, I kept you see, Lemon Tree is promoted by me. I don't have external sources of capital. I don't have other businesses and so on. Taj always has Tata Group. Oberoi has large investors, including Mr. Mukesh Ambani. ITC has the cigarette business, which is a cash cow supporting it. So all these big guys have external sources of capital should a bad time arise. I was very sure I could not raise external capital without, obviously, heavy dilution. Because remember one thing, if you ever become an entrepreneur, one of the big dilemmas you will face is growth versus dilution, growth capital versus dilution. And if I can give you a piece of advice here, it is better to be 10% of a large company, which is more resilient by nature of its size, than 100% of a small company. That is the reality. Okay. So I did not have much debt on our books. Our total debt was 500-600 crores. Our EBITDA was a couple of 100 crores. So we were fine till 2018, when I felt the economy was finally doing well. And I said, look, next year we're going to double in size, which we did, by the way. We acquired India's 4th largest mid-market chain for about 600 crores. We opened hotels worth 1,000 crores. And there we took debt. So now the debt on our books went up by 1,000 crores. We put in 600 and we borrowed 1,000 to grow. Because I was sure that there was now no risk. And foolish me, I didn't factor a coronavirus, which is a black swan event, which I will now always factor in. So end result of that was very simple. In end of March, my revenue had dropped by about 40%. I was already planning for an 80% drop. I went for the first time in my life into depression. Guys, I sat at home. Of course, we were all sitting at home. And I was asking myself, should I sell this company? Should I get out? This is just not worth it. Because the stress was enormous, you know. I was asking myself, do I have to lay off 6,000 people? And I remember after 4 or 5 days, I was reading something when suddenly I went into this space, which I have tried to consciously inculcate, where my mind starts working, not consciously, but unconsciously. And then when I come back to myself, by the way, I normally have a solution. So I said, if I am not resilient, then what chance do all the 8,000 employees have? And my lenders and, you know, everything, including my reputation. So I snapped out of it. I forced myself. It is very easy and very comforting to go blank. But I forced myself out of it. So I have no answer to that question. I think resilience is something you have to try for. And if you consciously try for it, guys, by the way, is gender agnostic, huh? Just to be specific. If you consciously try for it, you can get it. And if you do it from early times, at your age, when you're all in your early 20s, it will stand you great stead in your life, perhaps more than anything else. If you operate with good motives and a good heart and practice resilience, at the end of your lives, when you look back, you can only be happy.
Mr. Keswani, can I take the risk of sharing one bit about this resilience from my experience, because you touched on it? So I wanted to share with these students something which I did not know when I was younger. But this mental resilience already exists inside you. You actually are born with it. It's there. You just don't know, because there are layers and layers of falsehood that surround you. And if you remember, Mr. Keswani touched on that, get down into your heart. So I'm sure all of you are young. Many of you must have fallen in love. The reason they say you fall in love is because you stop thinking from your head, you fall to your heart. So actually, when you fall and start thinking from your heart, your consciousness expands. And that's when you will realize that the resilience is already inside you. You will realize that life has thrown a situation to you. You can't control the situation that comes to you. You can control who you are and how you embrace that situation. And if you embrace it with the magnanimity of the heart and not with the shallowness which the mind will try to put you into, you will find incredible resources will be unleashed to protect you. Trust me, I have gone through these phases in my personal life. You know, I wanted to be an Air Force pilot. So whatever I became in my life is something I never wanted to become. So anything I wanted to become, I never achieved. But still, we continue. And somebody just asked a question that what knowledge would you have wanted if you were in our age right now? And I would have said that, you know, we all go 6 feet under at the end of the day. So why is the hurry? There's absolute, just look at Mr. Keswani's journey. He has articulated it so beautifully, but do you realize that the man is not in any hurry and he's operating? I'm sorry, Mr. Keswani, if I'm summarizing it, but I see that you have used your heart rather than your head. Of course, you have the gift of an IIM Calcutta education to put it in language which is business-like and all that. But at the end of the day, you teared up. That doesn't happen because of the education at IIM Calcutta. It happens because your heart has expanded. It's embracing humanity. So that resilience comes. It will be bestowed on you if you stop being selfish. Trust me. I mean, I have no other way to tell you. You expand yourself, embrace people, the resilience will come. People will come around you.
I think we have another example here, actually, which is Anju.
Yes.
Which is somebody
absolutely.
who was teaching, highly paid, dollar paid, as many of us talk, in a prestigious university, Urbana-Champaign, wasn't it, Anju?
Yes, for a long time, most recently at Virginia Tech, but Urbana-Champaign is home.
Yeah. So here's the deal. She came back to India.
Yes, and she gave up everything. So look at this, her commitment to IIM Calcutta, that she will come back and give her best. So this is unselfish behavior.
Well, I will say I'm joined by many talented people, all of whom will share that. Just yesterday, I was having a conversation with 3 of our young faculty who were saying, my gosh, we're encountering entirely new circumstances, and they're devoted to their students. How they're preparing to get classes together is truly remarkable. And without quite thinking, I said to them, that, you know, there is a reason why we are all together. We are all together in this team, because it is up to us to make a difference in the best fashion that we can. And for you, our new students, I think that our students coming in, I know you're going to do the very best you can. Keep fast to the kinds of values that you've heard about today. There's never going to be a conflict between profitability and sustainability and being a good human being, being kind, being honest, and working with your heart if you reach in that direction, which you've just heard so well from all of our speakers today. Thank you.
Anju, one last thing for these kids, because they are going to go through the churning. Remember one thing, I don't know how many of you know from our history, that the churning, the great churning is called manthan. So when the churning happens, the poison comes out first. So don't give up, okay? The Amrit comes later. So, but many of us are not aware of our history. We are not taught that for reasons I don't know. But going back to the resilience part, anything that changes, I'll give you a thumb rule. Anything that changes is not real. The real never changes. So just like night goes and becomes day, good becomes bad, something happens, something goes away. Today you're in IIM Calcutta, tomorrow you would have graduated. These are not the real issues of life. So look for that and open your heart. The resilience will just be bestowed upon you for sure. It's already there actually. You'll discover that.
And look inside.
Yep.
So
We're with you.